here. Grace and peace to you from God the Father and from our Lord Jesus Christ. God is with us and His Spirit is here. I'm going to read in a moment or two from the book of Genesis. In autumn and in winter, we often follow a series. That means we will preach through a book, and we'll be starting that again soon. But over the summer, I decided that it would be people could choose their own texts from which to preach. And I don't know why I do that, because I hate it. I hate doing it. I hate having to choose my own passage to preach from. I much prefer somebody gives me something. It doesn't matter what it is. And so over the years, I've developed some rules for myself. And one rule is, if I'm not sure, if there's no passage, I am not spending 3 days. This is quite a big book. I am not spending 3 days flicking through for the one that jumps out at me. I just don't have enough life for that. So my rule is, I will go to the Revised Common Lectionary. I'll look at the Sunday. And before I go to it, I'll decide, am I going with the Old Testament one? Because there's 4 different readings. Am I going for the Old Testament, the Psalm, the epistle, the letter, or the gospel? And I just take whatever I get. So that's what you're getting. You're like that? Oh my goodness. No, it's really not that bad. And so we end up in Genesis chapter 32. Genesis 32. This was how this passage was chosen. I hope that doesn't disappoint you, that there wasn't hours of prayer in the choice of the passage. But what I can say is, I'm preaching this passage, I'm preaching the same passage as a large amount of the church throughout the world will be doing today. That's my defense, okay? Genesis 32, reading from verse 22. Oh, hope it's not mine. It sounds like mine. Okay, it's fine. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok, which always sounds to me like something out of Star Wars, I have to say. He crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, that being Jacob, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it's daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. That's our passage. All to Jesus I surrender, all to him I freely give. I surrender all. I surrender all. All to Jesus I surrender. I surrender all. These are words of a very famous evangelistic hymn. They would often be sung at evangelistic events, including Billy Graham campaigns, and they represent an important biblical sentiment about what it means to be a follower of Jesus. We surrender all. In this passage, Jacob surrenders nothing. The fascinating thing about this passage is he is blessed not because he surrenders, but because he refuses to give up the struggle with the shadow stranger in the night. This wrestling match doesn't seem to be one that Jacob could ever win. The shadow stranger seems to have a restrained power that has devastating consequences if used. The kind of power that you only need to touch someone's hip and you can put it out of place. Jacob himself recognizes that he has been, verse 30, spared in the wrestling match. The wrestling match was one he could never, ever win. Yet Jacob is blessed, not because he surrenders, but because he refuses to give up the struggle. He is blessed not because he lets go, but because he is determined to hang on even after his hip has been wrenched. Jacob is blessed because he perseveres in the struggle. And this is a passage for the strugglers. And it's a passage that says, you can be blessed if you'll hang on in the struggle. Marlon Robinson, the author, said about this passage, this is one of the most famous and mysterious passages in Scripture. Mysterious is a good word. The Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor says that we live in a secular age. And in that secular age in which we live with two pressures, a downward pressure and an upward pressure. The downward pressure is that we always want to explain and need to explain everything rationally and scientifically. But the other pressure we face is that we need and want to experience wonder and transcendence and mystery. And we find ourselves caught in that kind of world. But to use the language from Charles Taylor, this particular passage invites us into the world of enchantment. It invites us into a world where we realize that our lives are porous and open to those forces bigger than ourselves. It's a passage that invites us into the world of the spiritual and the supernatural and the mysterious. There is something almost uncomfortably physical about this wrestling match. I quote, Jacob fought the stranger all night, muscle against muscle, flesh against flesh, one body the mirror of the other. Soon they were panting in time. Soon Jacob's sweat ran into the stranger's sweat, and the stranger's sweat ran combined with Jacob's sweat. Neither could overpower the other. That quote comes early from Lamar Nash's book. After this struggle, Jacob bears the physical marks in his body, and he limps away. But yet this is a mysterious struggle. It takes place in the night. It takes place with a shadow stranger who wants away before daylight. It takes place in the borderlands, and it takes place against one who has restrained power. This story is so physically spiritual and spiritually physical, it is difficult for us to pull those things apart. But this is a passage for strugglers, for those of us who live in the secular world but are open to the mystery of wrestling with the enchantment of the supernatural and the spiritual and the reality of God. Persevering in the struggle can be the source of blessing. The passage tells us, and this is really interesting, at least I thought, and I had to preach it because I'd chosen it. What's really interesting is at the beginning of the passage it tells us that Jacob wrestled with a man. And that is the word. And those who are interested in the words would go to the Hebrew and go, this is the word for man. He wrestles here with a man. Verse 24, Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. But that surely just begs the question, who is this man? The problem, and yet the possibility of the passage is it doesn't tell us, which allows our own imagination to go running a little bit, which can be a good thing or a bad thing if it's Davy's imagination, and a good thing if it's mine. So as I tried to work this out, I looked up what some of the traditional and classical Jewish rabbis had said about this passage, because some of them are pretty creative. And one of the things that they come up with, talking about this passage, they suggest is that the man that Jacob wrestles with is Jacob. That the figure in this story symbolizes Jacob's wrestling with himself. To borrow or paraphrase badly from the world of psychology, Jacob had some personal work to do. And if you read his character, Jacob, oh my, had some personal work to do. And because I don't want to be too hard on him, because I was unimpressed, I want to tell this story. And hopefully it'll make sense near the end. Throughout our married life, Suzanne and I have nearly always had a dog. We've had 4 dogs, all of them rescue dogs. I can't remember if we named any of them. Maybe the first one, I can't quite remember. But we've had 4 dogs. First, there was Tina. Second, there was Max. Fourth, there was the adorable Sitka, the one we have just now. And number 3 was Yappy. Even if I say his name, I can hear Suzanne say, poor Yappy. Yappy was a Romanian street dog, rescued by a Dutch charity from the kind of shelters where they put the tags in their ears, such as you would get in clothes to Marks and Spencer's. We got him in Cologne, in Germany, took him back to the Netherlands where we were living before we took him in the boat over to the UK and flew him to Canada. Yeah, he's what? He had no say in any of this. Yappy was undoubtedly the most difficult dog that we have ever had in our lives. He clearly had been mistreated, and therefore he responded to everything with fear and aggression, sometimes in equal measure, and usually all at the one time. He was big, and he was strong, and if he sat in front of you when you tried to pass him and he growled at you, you didn't pass him. I think we, at one point in our life, despaired that we could keep Yappy, but when we discovered, which we hadn't been told, that 2 families had already given him back, instead of doing the sensible thing, we decided we were going to hunker down. We had promised him a forever home. And so we decided we would persevere and try and work out how to keep this dog and our friends. Now, to be fair, Yappy always adored Suzanne, tolerated me, and hated everybody else. During the pandemic, things thawed a little. By the way, she was the only one also brave enough to stick her hand down its throat to get the stick out that was stuck there, okay? I know, I was like that, I'm not getting near that thing. During the pandemic, Yappy and I he became my office buddy, and things were a bit easier. So I want you to know that we've got a lot of affection for Yappy. But when I think of the people he nipped, the people he stalked, and the people he terrified when he appeared from the back of the house, round the front of the house, rushing towards him, relief only crossing their faces when they realized the rope wasn't quite long enough. So when I think about all these things together, this is how we describe Yappy to people. It was tricky. He was tricky. Yappy is spelled J-A-P-I-E. It's a Dutch name, and it means little Jacob. So with affection, because his mother loved him very much, which was a bit of a problem, Jacob was tricky. He had personal work to do. And it does make some sense to think that during the night, he was wrestling with his own character. Now, perhaps not like Jacob, but in our own way, we know what it is to wrestle with our own characters. maybe morally, or emotionally, or at times mentally. And as we wrestle, we might think to ourselves, it's because I'm not a good enough Christian, I need to surrender more. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just need to persevere in your struggle. For in this story, the blessing comes because Jacob holds on. However, when we read the story, you and I know the man doesn't quite seem human. He seems otherworldly. There are things about him that suggest to us that he's not just a normal human being. The shadow stranger is different. It is almost as though he comes from another realm. He has got power that is restrained. He wants to escape before the daylight, and he refuses to give his name. These are all issues of mystery. Hosea, the prophet, describes the shadow stranger as an angel. Hosea 12, verse 4, he struggled, that being Jacob, with an angel and overcame him. He wept and begged for his favor. I mean, if we had read the whole of Genesis 32, we might have been prepared to think about an angel because verse 1 talks about angels, Jacob and angels. And so it might make sense to think that this person who indeed Jacob wrestled with was an angel. And this is where it gets fun, because some people say that the angel he wrestled with was one of the angels who sang God's praise in the morning. So the reason he had to get away before daylight was so he could get back and into the choir. I don't know what I make of that. What is more interesting is, again, back with the rabbis for a moment. The rabbis suggest to us that the angel with whom Jacob wrestled was Esau's guardian angel. Who's Esau? Jacob's brother. Esau, the one who was born with Jacob hanging on to his heel because Jacob always wanted to be first. Esau, the one who Jacob stole his rights as the firstborn from. Esau, who threatened to kill Jacob as soon as their father was dead and the mourning period was over. Esau, who Jacob ran away from and lived in a foreign land for a long time. Esau, who Jacob was going to meet the next morning, who we are told in the passage is on his way to meet Jacob with 400 of his men. And the image here is that here he is wrestling with his experience with other people. He's wrestling in the night with his story where he not simply cheated, but at times was cheated. Perhaps in some way, the angel becomes symbolic of the others that we have wrestled with throughout our life. The people we have loved and lost, the people who have helped and hurt, the people who have impacted us and we have impacted them, the people who have hurt us, disappointed us, let us down. Church would be a beautiful community except for the people. Those not like me, those who I might disagree with, and those who I might feel an umbrage against. You know, sometimes our wrestle is with other people, our history with them, and our experience of them. And the next morning, when Jacob met Esau, Jacob did homage to his brother, gave him back the things he'd stolen from him, from his birthright. There was healing in the morning, but actually the blessing came through the struggle of the night. This is a passage for strugglers. The blessing can be found in the struggle. But Stuart, you say, it says in my version of the Bible, as it does in mine, that Jacob here wrestled with God. That's what the little headings say. I hope you've heard me preach long enough that you know I'm really suspicious of all the headings. However, in this particular instance, there's good ground for that, because on the one hand, Jacob himself says, verse 30, I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. And he maybe came to that conclusion because the shadow stranger, the man who he wrestled with, said to him, you have struggled with God and humans and yet have overcome. Of course, part of the struggle that you and I might have with God, come on, we do sometimes. Part of the struggle that you and I might have with God might be also a struggle with ourselves and our struggle with others. That can all be part of it. In turn, the struggle that we might have with God can involve our doubts and fears about God and God's way in the world. Our struggle with God can involve questions and doubts. It can involve us trying to make sense of what we've been taught about God and our experiences in life. A lot of people are having to deconstruct their faith today because the faith that was constructed for them was problematic in the first place. Our struggle with God can be a struggle when we read the Bible and we see the genocide, the treatment of women, and the destruction of cities. It can be a struggle with so many things. And if we are open about that struggle, we may be pitied and prayed for and even attacked. But here's the thing. Read the story. Jacob is blessed because he struggles. And here's the wonderful thing. Not that Jacob was willing to struggle with God, but God was willing to struggle with Jacob and yet bless him. This is a passage for those who struggle. Persevere in the struggle and seek for your blessing. During the week, some of us were talking about the fact that at communion, on the third Sunday of the month, at the back we offer prayer for blessing. And one member of the congregation said, I got permission. One member of the congregation said, I'll take all the blessings I can get. I think that's good. I did a quick word search for blessing in the Old Testament. And I think a helpful description of what a blessing is it can mean more of life in abundance. For Jacob, it meant that his name would live on forever through the people. But blessing, more life and abundance will mean different things for different people. For the mourning, it means they're comforted. For the hungry, it means that they are fed. For those of you who struggle, the blessing will be related to the struggle. So persevere in your struggle and seek for the blessing. Malcolm Gutt, if that's how you say his name, has written a poem about this passage that I'm going to finish with. And it captures these ideas of struggling with self and with others and with God. And this is what he writes. I dare not face my brother in the morning. I dare not look upon the things I've done. Dare not ignore a nightmare's dreadful warning. Dare not endure the rising of the sun. My family, my goods are sent before me. I cannot sleep on this strange river shore. I have betrayed the son of the one who bore me, and my own soul now rejects me to the core. But in the desert darkness one has found me. Embracing me, he will not let me go, nor will I let him go whose arms surround me until he tells me all I need to know and blesses me where daybreak stakes its claim with love that wounds and heals and with his name. This is a passage for the strugglers. Persevere in the struggle and seek for the blessing. Amen.